We're going to take a look at how you might apply those ideas that we achieved by rendering the geometric shapes to rendering furniture. And we're going to work with this example. And when you look on Slate, you'll find the template for it. And in looking at the template, the lighting is from the front this time. So you can go back to our rendering of the central lighting, our exercise 1, and have a look at the cylinder. And it was rendered in very much the same way and lit very much the same way. This template can be traced, transferred to a piece of marker paper, and rendered. In doing that, remember that you must turn your paper over and use the back. Also, look for a pen that won't bleed when you put marker over it. The Sharpie's pretty good. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Pigment liner pens, that little set that you have, will work best. Also, remember to make your outside lines darker and your inside lines thinner. This rendering in progress of this sofa has been greatly informed by an understanding of how the grayscale works in terms of light and shade. And it's a light sofa, so the rendering of the grays is a light treatment. In this example, we're also seeing hatching. And what the beauty of hatching is that it provides a translucent value, not very dark. As you see, the lines are very, very thin. But this translucent value with some translucent marker over top keeps the shadows light and airy. They're not solid things. I've made the outer line thicker and the inside lines a little bit thinner. And also, when you map out your shadow and you render it, you need to use a 30% gray to outline it. Never outline a shadow in black. Now, we have to go back to our map. Our chair is most like our box, and we're going to use the same set of markers and the same set of values. You don't always have to stick to these grays. You've got a whole set of them. All you need to do is make sure that you skip a grade, skip a value in between each one. So I've moved from 1 to 3 rather than 1 to 2, for example. And I've moved from 3 to 5 rather than 3 to 4. You need enough of a value contrast for it to work. So the top of my seat of my chair, I'm going to use a light value. So I have the white of the paper, I have the number 1 white marker, and the number 3 marker. So these are all in the light, but as true to form, I'm going to use mostly the number 1 marker. The halftone, that's our facing planes. I'm going to use the 3 and the 5, mostly the 3, and then accent with 5. And the shadow side, I'm going to use mostly the 5 and accent with the 7. So as we saw before, these are those planes that are attached to the cast shadow. Why not start with the shadow? That way we know how dark our darkest dark is, and then we can move forward to the light. It's not a bad way to go. So I'm going to wet it with my 50. Now if I could move this, I would move it, but I can't. I'm stuck because of I don't want to get out of the camera range. So, but if you can keep it untethered to your table and move it all about, then move it, because it makes it a lot easier, as you know, to be able to do what you need to do. Now I'm going to go quite dark where the shadow begins. I'm going to put this in too, because this is really quite dark, even though it's in the light. That's our punch line working. And this is made a mark, so I'm going to use the 5 to just blend it in a little bit. And as long as it's still sort of wet, I can go back and do that. This is still sort of wet, so it's humid where I am, so I can go back and do this. Attach the previous one. But you see how you go back and forth and back and forth. If you don't it will dry too quickly. And I rounded out my shadow a little bit too. It was very square when I left off last time. So I'm just getting enough of this down that I can blend it in. And I'm going to do something different than what we did with our geometric shapes. I'm going to pick up a 30 and start blending the 50 out with a 30. I'm finding that this is a huge shadow, a very big shadow, so I need to make it a little softer as it goes away. So I'm using the 30. Now my 30 was a little bit drier than my 50, so it took some of my 50 off the paper. So I might have to go back there, but it's wet, so it may not be such a bad problem if I go back here. And see, it's a value problem. If you get a blotchy part, it's a value problem. So in this case, going back with a lighter marker wouldn't help, but going back with the 50 might help. The side is in shadow, so I'm going to use my 50 and my 70 again, mostly 50. Now this is round, so I have to think about what shape. Should I go over? Should I go under? I know this goes over like this, and I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to bring it down like this. Should be shadow inside that form. And I want it to be lighter down here because it's getting light from the surface it's sitting on. So I'm going to put a little bit of 70 in, not too much. I don't want this to be too dark when I finish. So I'm blending with my 50. So there'd be a little bit of contrast between it. Now I've got another segment to do. If I want to roll this form like this, I can put a little bit of the 70 in here while it's still very wet and not introduce it again until down here, so that it will have a little highlighted area just where this rolls. Okay, and I can do the same up here. I might start with a little bit of a 30 just to make this, it's a little closer to the light. I could have started with 50. It wouldn't have made a whole lot of difference, as you'll see, but I think I like to start with the 30 so that when I put the 50 in, there's a little bit softer impression up at the top. So what that means for my 70 is that I'm going to put it in, and it's fabric after all, so I'm going to give it a little bit of shape rather than making it so square. Now I've got to blend that in with the 50 so that it doesn't there. I'm going to blend this in a little bit more too. It's dried, but I might get away with it. It's still a little bit wet. If you can feel it with your finger, if it's still a little cold, you can maybe add a little bit more to it. I've got a couple more pieces of space here that need this kind of attention with our 50 and our 70. So here we have a little, and you notice that I'm putting the 70 where the shadow begins. That's where the most contrast is. And I'm getting a little separation by having a little bit of contrast there between the 50 and the 70. Okay, one more panel to do here. We've got maybe a couple more. There's my 50 because I'm on a side plane. That's going to be nice to set up this arm. So I might go dark down here just to set that arm apart from the cushion. So you have alternate ways of presenting these ideas. And I'm putting the 50 in here for my cushion. It's round, so I'm going to go round. And maybe under, because it's going to have a shadow underneath. So put under and under here as well. And there's a cast shadow, so I can put the cast shadow. Remember, cast shadow is just a little bit lower. This I'm going to put in as a shape as well, if I can, so that this will set up that arm again. So that little bit of dark in there is going to set up the arm. I might just put a little 70 under here to set up the cushion. It's nice not to have to think about color. Sometimes if you do a gray study and then you do it in color, you have a better chance of getting something that looks believable, because you're not distracted by how is this the right blue, or is it too dark, or is it too cold, or is it the right one, or should it be more yellow? You don't have those distractions. So as we saw, this is our map, or our understanding of where the shadows will fall. Now in our floor plan we would do the same thing, and as I mentioned before, this is rather unusual for a floor plan. Normally you would just do a simple 45-degree floor plan, but we'll follow through with this and only use one value for a floor plan. They're really tiny. This is actually quite huge for a floor plan, so in actuality it would be quite small. That helps to set up the chair. And all of our top planes are light, so when we do this, we'll do the top light planes. There may be some shadows. We can go in and put some shadows in here to help set things up a little bit, but other than that, it's mostly light. It's in the light. Okay, now the front planes are our next value change. We can put away our 70 for sure now and just work with our 30 and our 50. Our front plane is 3 and 5. I have 30 and 50. Mine are in percentages, but it all works out the same. So I want it to be mostly 30 though. And again, I'm thinking of the shape that I'm dealing with. It's fabric, so I don't want to go in there and make it too dark. But again, I'm not just putting one stroke. I'm moving back and forth, and I want to have a little bit of a key line at the front here. I want to get this in, but a little lighter than. And I can put the 50 inside while it's wet. And wherever I have an indication of a little bit of fold in the fabric, I can bring that in. So you don't look in shadow for details, you look in the light for details. So that's what I'm trying to get across with this rendition. I'm back up here with my 30. I'm going to put a couple of strokes in there. I can join it up with this shadow. And this is really getting close to the light now, so I don't want to put too much shadow on here, but it might be nice just to throw in a little swizzle there. This I think will be a nice middle value too. It's not in the light, but it's not in the shadow either. Remember, we looked at that. We saw that it's getting light from the light source that's hitting the floor there. But I can set up that little light space that I left here. Maybe a little darker at the bottom, at the top. And these are front planes, so I can go in and put them in the 3 and a little bit of 5 at the top. And the top I'm leaving maybe mostly the white of the paper. This is the front plane, so I can go in with my 30, and I try to show that this is coming forward, so I leave it white. And I'll bring this down. I'm trying to get a feel for the form and the shapes as I move down them. It's a good idea too to have a plan before you start out. So I can throw a little bit of that in. And this is a front plane as well. And it has a shadow already on it, a cast shadow, so I'm just going to leave a little area of white to separate it from the shadow side. Okay, now the light. We'll go into the light. And that's our 1 and our 3. Now, remember on our box what we had to do. We had to show just a little bit of value here to give this some emphasis, this light area. So I'm going to do something similar here, but I'm trying to keep in mind the kind of shape that I'm dealing with here. I'm dealing with a cushion, so if you're a little nervous about starting with the 3, you can start with the 1. If you're not quite sure how much to put on, you can start with the 1. And then with the 3, while that's wet, I can put it inside and start answering it at the front here. And that makes that look lighter than this. That's the whole key. If it doesn't, I'll put more 30 on here just to separate the two. But I get a feeling of the light hitting here and here. Now, as I mentioned before, on our floor plan, this is all light, except for those few little shadows that we put in, and we might emphasize those a little bit more. On a floor plan, you use everything you've got to try and give this some dimension. So I'm going to use mostly the 1, but I'm going to just put it inside the forms, not at the edge of the form. So as you can see, I'll make it a little darker so you can see I'm going to go inside. So there's a little bit of white surrounding all of that. And I might go in and do the same thing on the top here of the cushion. The back of the cushion now, that can have some shadows. So maybe I'll put some 5 back there. And leave a little bit of 3 on the front, just dotted on, so I have a separation between front and back. And now in the center, I'm going to go a little bit dark to light, front to back, so that separates the back from the front. Here I'll go a little bit, I can't get close, so I'm sorry about that. I have to stay away from this, but I'm leaving white wherever I can to separate one thing from another. Now I'm going to put a little bit, I'm using the 30. I haven't used the 1 at all almost, but and that would be enough for your shadow. Now you might, having looked at this now, after you've got some values on, since we didn't start with the dark, we just presumed how dark we ought to make it. But now that I'm looking at it, I think it should go a little darker. So I can do that and then just let it taper off at the back. Well, this is my favorite thing. It's a cover from a sketchbook, but I think you can see it has a pattern of dots. Now I'm in perspective, and these dots aren't, so I have to use this sparingly. I can do it on this side because the dots will be all straight. So I'm going to straighten it with the edge of my paper and see, so that when I rub it and put these dots on, they're going in the right direction. They're not getting any smaller though, and in perspective they would be, as you know. So I have to taper off before I get right to the very end. But it's just a little indication. And now on this side I have to be careful because it's in perspective as well. So, and I have to be lighter because I'm on a lighter side. So I'm just going to barely put any on. Just put it on where it's darkest, where I've rendered the darkest, and just let it melt away. And here I'll put a little bit on the top and let it melt away. And at the back, just let it melt away at the back. I picked a bad spot. So you get a feeling for start in the dark and move your way up to the light. So it's just barely there. But you can have a lot of fun with this. You can also use the markers themselves to put on a bit of a design. So if I wanted to, of course stripes are easy to do, but if you want to put a little bit of a abstract design over it. You can dot and swirl and dash. The markers are great for that. And if that wasn't dark enough, we can go a little bit darker, and I don't want to use too much of the 70, but in where the pattern is darker, where the shadow is darker, you need to use a darker marker. Pattern is like that. In the light it's lighter, in the shadow it's a little more shadowy, but there's so much that you can do. And then at the end you look to see, do all of the shapes have enough separation, and if they don't, then you go back and separate things a little bit more with the darker marker, little dark accents to set things up.